everybody, it's Writing Tutor Sarah here, and today we're looking at my own personal writing so that I can show you guys a format sample and walk you through some things to look at when you're focusing on, revising a paper you've already written. So this could be after a peer review, or if you're reviewing it just yourself, or if you're reviewing someone else's paper, if you're doing the peer review. So this is a paper I wrote in 2023. Is it a little dated? Yes. Does it still have all the things I want to teach you? Yes. It's got, most of all, the formatting. Now, this is a paper I got a 100 on in English ML1B Honors. You might see our lovely friendly face Professor Tenenhouse. She is actually one of the heads of the Writing Center, so if you see her, please feel free to say hi, ask her some questions. We love Professor Tenenhouse. I actually took a course with her in 2023. I feel old. Anyways, here are some things to look out for, both formatting-wise and writing-wise, when you're looking over your paper or someone else's. So, first we've got our header and our page numbers. Now, I'm working in Google Docs. There are some other different qualities in a Word format. Now, when I email tutor, I do give both resources that walk you through page numbers on Google Docs and walk you through page numbers on Word documents, page numbers being an example on formatting. So, don't be alarmed. You could always talk to one of our tutors if you need further walkthrough on formatting. I think we also have a couple resources. Feel free to ask us. We're here to help. Anyways, this is just a broad overview. If I double click, I will be in the header format. Now the header is the top of every page. If you write something up here, it will show up down here. So this is actually really cool. I put my last name and I put options, page numbers, insert, and I insert page numbers, and that's why it changes every page. So every page has a 1, a 2, a 3, the works. So that's the first thing you need. And remember, it's not just the page number, because it's MLA formatting. If it's APA, it's a different story, but in MLA, you have your last name and your page number. Here's our, what I like to call the left header format, because it's the header on the left. I've got my first name, my last name. Underneath, I've got Professor Tenenhouse's name. Underneath Professor Tenenhouse, I've got the class I'm writing for, and the date. The date does not have slashes, does not have dashes, does not have commas. It's quite literally day, month, year, no commas. No funny business. Next, we've got our title. Our title is on one of the only things in the paper that is centered. It does not need to be in bold, it does not need to be underlined, but make sure you've got the capitalization rules down for how to capitalize in a title. When in doubt, 9 times out of 10, the word should be capitalized. If you have more questions about that, you could always reach out to me. I have a little resource. It just didn't seem worth making a video about. If you really want a video, maybe someday I'll make one. Make sure you indent all of your paragraphs. That's how we know that you're starting a new paragraph. You do not have a full entered line of space here. We don't want one of these bad boys. That's what the indent's for, so we know there's a new paragraph starting. I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom. We're starting with format. That's how I check people's work. I start with formatting. Then we got our works cited. The title of the works cited, because the title is centered. If there's only one work, it would then become work cited. But I've got multiple, so it's works. So it's in alphabetical order. Specifically, if it's author's last name or title, it doesn't matter. They're all together, and they're all in alphabetical order. So if I had a title that started with A, it would go before Jenkins. It doesn't matter if it's an author or a title. Now, the title comes first when there is no author accredited to the source. That's usually on websites. Like, this website was not written by Lewis Jenkins. It's just about Lewis Jenkins. So the title is Lewis Jenkins. You would not put the organization first in MLA. In APA, that's another story. You also have your access date if it's an online resource. If they have the published date, like they have here, in 1995, wow, I feel like that's very old. And yet, its poetry is still meaningful in the present. Isn't that nice? So, I've got Jenkins Lewis first, Lewis Jenkins second, prose, definition first, well, third, prose poem fourth. Alphabetical. You'll also notice they have something that looks like an indent, but it's reversed. The indent comes second. This is called a hanging indent. So, for resources on hanging indents, please come to me. It's just a little button up here, but I'm happy to walk you through it. It takes a couple tries. Now I do it in my sleep. Wow. So, You've got them all alphabetical. You don't need lines of space between the two because it's double spaced, and the hanging indent kind of does that job for us to show us these are different sources. And this will also help us with our in-text citations. I'm going to scroll up. Now, this is Jenkins 3. This tells me this is Jenkins' poem on line 3. In a book, it might be page 3. No commas, no nothing. Just in the parentheses, after my quote, I said, okay, this is Jenkins 3. This tells me I could scroll down and go, oh, wow, it's Jenkins. So this is the source that we're referencing. If you have two sources by the same author, if they're both by Lewis Jenkins, then you would use in your works, not your works cited, but your in-text, you would use the title. And the title would probably be in quotation marks. Now, that might be football as the title. So let's see if I can find the others. These are a lot of Jenkins. Where's my non-Jenkins? I have so many other ones. Where are they? Please, where are they? Where are they? Okay, here. Notice this one doesn't have an author, so in our in-text citation, I'm going to use the title of the article, which is Prose Definition and Meaning. And as you can see, I used it as a definition. So you're not going to say Merriam-Webster, because that is not the title. That's the organization. You're going to say the title. The title is Prose Definition and Meaning. So in this case, they're not all going to be named that. So that's just our formatting. Now let's dig into the nitty-gritty of the actual writing. Now, one thing I would like to point out that I do not like about this paper, I use I. I hate talking about myself in a paper. I. It works here, I guess, but I really don't like it. This is me trying to do a hook based on a personal anecdote, and yet, while it does work here, I would not recommend it on average. While it's engaging, I still prefer to, stay a little technical, because when we run into I's, it feels less professional, it feels more opinionated, and we want to stay professional. So I do not recommend doing this. Everything else about this paper is great, and I love using it as an example, but I hate my opening. Personally, not a fan. Professor Tenenhouse likes a little more creativity, so she was okay with this. She's a little more flexible. We love her. But some professors will say, no, I do not want I also did not type out the word 5. If the number is under the number 10, if it's any number under 10, it should be written out as a word. But if it's more, like 50, you'd write it as a number. So even tutors make mistakes. This was pre-tutordom, but I digress. Let's look at my thesis. Now, all of these things are usually things that I have a deeper video on. I have a video on formatting, I have a video on works cited, I have a video on thesis and topic sentence and quote lead-ins in one of my videos. I think it's the quote video, probably. Haha. In-text citations with the quote lead video. Analysis, the works. These are just pointing out where you might find them in a paper. The usual length for them, right? This is like the average length for an introduction. And this is where your thesis goes at the end of the introduction. Again, if you need help writing a thesis, that's a different video, and you can also reach out to us. Now, I've got my thesis. I've discussed the topic, football by Lewis Jenkins. I talk about my argument of how it uses prose, my evidence of prose formatting and metaphors and overarching narrative. And what's it doing? It's doing that to demonstrate how sometimes leisure must be traded for hard work to ensure stability and success. So more like a theme. Then I've got my topic sentence. This is going to introduce the topic of this paragraph. 9 times out of 10, it has to relate to the thesis to some degree. Then I've got a quote lead-in. Every quote should not be just dropped into our sentence, right? We need to open it up by talking about something that has to do with that quote, right? So the Poetry Foundation describes prose format as blah, 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 blah. I've got my in-text citation. Notice how it's a title of an article because there's no author. And then I've got my analysis. Look at how long this analysis is. This is, let's count the sentences, everybody. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is more sentences than most. I usually recommend 2 to 3 sentences, but it's okay to go a little over. 4 sentences is okay if they're short. So this is a good length for analysis. It's okay to have a little extra analysis, but we want to make sure we're not over quoting by having enough analysis for each quote. I do it again here. Let's count the the sentences, everybody. We've got 1. We've got 2. We've got 2. a little shorter, but they're longer sentences, so it's okay. And then I've got a concluding sentence. This wraps up the concept in this paragraph with a more broad take that pairs both quotes together to make one big, effective point. And this helps us conclude this topic and move on to the next. As you can see, I'm going to be doing this throughout the whole paper. No need to really move into these details. And then we've got our conclusion. Notice it's roughly a similar length to our introduction. It could be a little bit shorter, but it's roughly the same length. We don't want a really short conclusion. The reason this is the same length is because it has similar concepts in the conclusion. You reword your thesis, you take us through what we talked about, and then we give a broad final tie-off. Just like we start with a broad introduction that's engaging, we talk about the background information, and then we go into our thesis. So it's quite literally a reflection of our introduction. Then we got our works cited. Yippee! Hooray! This is a final draft. So let's look at some examples of not a final draft. I'm going to preface this with, this is my boyfriend's writing. I have been given permission to showcase this writing. For context, my boyfriend was not taught how to write in the third person until he got to college. The high school system and the education system kind of failed him. He did not learn, they never made him learn how to write in the third person, so up until this point, he had not been writing in the third person. So that's why his writing's a little choppier than most. And that's because he didn't get a proper education, which is unfortunate. And everybody's got different starting points, and I'm here to show this and say this is not a bad piece of writing. This is just a piece of writing that clearly needs revision, and that's okay. Your first draft is not going to be perfect, ever. As you can tell, my final draft isn't even perfect. So, this is writing shared with permission from my boyfriend. I've even cited him here. His writing's a little later on. This is 2024. This is from an English MO1A course, a theater course, and a childhood development course here at Northport College. And here are the actual analysis I gave him on some of these. So, this is his first one. It's about human development, and I specifically focused on these two parts. He does some great things here. He interacts with the article he's going to talk about. He is trying to give us a nice thesis, or like a topic sentence for the paragraph, and some background information. But here is what he needed. This paragraph, this first paragraph, had a semicolon used incorrectly. Semicolons are hard. And for somebody who was never taught formal writing, I'm actually shocked he used one. I'm actually very proud of him. And so I had to teach him how to use semicolons, and that's okay. A lot of you might not know how to use semicolons yet. That's okay. As you can see in this resource, I even link a lovely resource from my goats, Owl Purdue Owl from Purdue University, about commas versus semicolons and when to use which. Now, I talk about making sure when you use a semicolon, it's to merge two separate sentences worth of thoughts into one, making sure you don't need a semicolon instead of a comma, and there's a resource. So, he wrote, the article shows what causes may lead to a single-parent family forming. These being, ... divorce, separation, unplanned pregnancy, and intentional choice. Notice that's very choppy because he put this semicolon in where it didn't need to be. So, this is one sentence on its own, right? But this is not. These being divorce, if I just started by telling you these being divorce, separation, unplanned pregnancy, I would be kind of confused. But if I came up to you and said, the article shows what causes may lead to a single-parent family forming. Okay, I got that. That makes sense to me. I might not know what article you're talking about, but I know what that sentence makes sense to me. I'm not confused. Whatever article you're talking about, this is what you're trying to say about it. The other thing is that he starts this sentence with because. It's recommended when you use because it's to merge two halves of a sentence together. You don't want to start a sentence with it. So again, it kind of makes it kind of confusing because you don't know what it's tying into. Usually because is to relate to the sentence before it, but you should just remove this period and have it be here. You would say, these being divorce, separation, unplanned pregnancy, and intentional choice because, oh, well, actually, in this case, you wouldn't even do that. You would just take these out and say, these reasons are, oh my gosh, sometimes I get a little confused with this writing. Excuse me. Because of these reasons being a large group of events and all over the world, the concept of single parenting differs globally. This one's going to need a full rewrite in my opinion, but the big thing was that because. I would remove the because. I would say, I would have these go together. I would say, I would put a comma here. I let's say these being divorce, separation, unplanned pregnancy, and intentional choice. These reasons are a large group. These reasons are a large reason that the concept of single parenting differs globally, and I would remove all the filler words. But he does end it out strong. He kind of specifies that the article does highlight what has become of single-parent families and the challenges they face in their lives. I think this is an excellent sentence. So again, while he had some things that he needed to change, I thought overall this paragraph was pretty solid. This is a picture of a film paper analyzing The Dark Knight. And these are some feedback I gave him. Now, the first one, he has a very small paragraph starting with "as we traverse." Honestly, this paragraph and the paragraph below it go together really well, and if you just merge them together, it would flow better. This, on its own, sounds very choppy, sounds unfinished, sounds incomplete, so I would merge it down. I felt like he had a lot of questions unanswered that because he was talking very shallowly about the concept. He was also looking for ways to expand on this paper. He thought it was too short, he needed to meet a word count, so I asked him some questions, right? I said, okay, you said the audience learns he is a character willing to backstab his own people if he makes out with the most money. I was like, I need you to elaborate on this, dog. This is a little too broad. You kind of throw it out and you don't elaborate, and then you move on. And I felt kind of whiplashed. Can you elaborate this sentence? And then he did. He said, by using visual elements. I said, give us some examples of those visual elements. It shouldn't be an aside since it's a main part of the prompt of the film paper that you're analyzing, so you should give us some examples. He says, he is an agent of chaos. He does that thing with the semicolons again, which I told him about. I didn't want to hammer him over the head with that concept. But he is an agent of chaos that is willing to be a performer and take advantage of anything that will happen if it means that it will lead to the most amount of pain and suffering. And I said, well, how does the scene show that? Can you give us some examples as to why you think that he's an agent of chaos? Then he says, then I tell him, I say, you do a lot of telling the reader how things are, so how about showing these comments through some examples? So you're saying it's like this, now show me. And I also said, whenever you put the word it, because he says it over here a lot, I said, reconsider the usage and maybe replace it with clarification of whatever it is, right? What does it mean? That it will lead to the most amount of pain and suffering. What does that mean? I know Batman's edgy, but I need some detail, guys. I can't deal with it being so wishy-washy. So, details are good. When you're analyzing, details are great. And then, there's the scholarship essay. He, in this one, kind of writes like he's giving a speech, right? And I feel like, while it could be great to use speech to help dictate how we write a paper, sometimes they need different things to sound professional. This would sound great if he was saying it out loud to people. And he might notice some of these errors, and he might not say it directly exactly like this if he said it out loud. I had him read this out loud, and he quickly realized that some things needed to be reworded. But he said, when looking to the future, I aspire to help those around me. Great. But then he goes, how I'm going to go about this, I plan to become a teacher. A great way to reword this would be, I plan to go about this by becoming a teacher. Notice how sometimes sentences, the concepts are good, but the wording is off. It's a little hard. It kind of sticks in your mouth a little bit. You fumble. You can't really speak very clearly with this sentence. He does use a semicolon, right? I was very proud of him. He said, I hope to start out by getting my bachelor's in education in anthropology. And then, new sentence concept, but still tied in the same vein, so he uses a semicolon. Good job. I hope to use my degree so that I can start teaching at a high school level. Great. I love that. So he's telling us what he plans to do, but then he says, people may wonder why I plan to pursue anthropology and not just any other science, and the answer is simple. He doesn't tell us the answer in that sentence. He doesn't really need that sentence at all. He could just say, I plan to pursue anthropology because the prospects and concepts of the subject holds have always been extremely interesting to me. So a lot of this is filler words. He kind of like says, and it kind of feels like a movie script or like a big pitch, like a sales pitch. But it doesn't need to be that. It could be just like a humble little paragraph about yourself. It is also because I have always. He brought the it back in. I was like, what are you doing? Be a little more detailed with the it. It is also because I've always held an interest in learning about the different people around the world and how they live their lives. Great! Anthropology, specifically the subcategory of cultural anthropology, has always been an amazing source of intrigue and inspiration for me. That's why I could see myself pursuing this path of knowledge for the rest of my life. Amazing. To be able to then go forth and share this passion with the youth, allowing the knowledge to stay alive for future generations, seems like a noble path of action that I'm motivated to pursue. So he ends it out strong. So again, a really good paragraph overall, but some of these sentences just take away from all the great things he's trying to say. So when you're reading something, or you're reading over something, I highly recommend reading it out loud. Notice when I read out loud, it's very easy to pinpoint where some of these sentences are a little bit choppy, where they need to be rewritten, and I do this for a living, so obviously I'm able to pick up on this really quickly, but it's okay to go with a few different ideas. You could rewrite the sentence a few times, see how you feel. Don't be afraid to not delete things until you're completely sure you want to change it. That's okay. Just to have options to go back to if you don't like the new option. So there's so many options, I think, is the big thing. English is a double-edged sword. You've got all this creativity and room to explore, but also sometimes you fly too close to the sun and you don't explain what it means and everyone's confused. You know what you're talking about, but we want to make sure that the audience is on the same page. And that's kind of why I tend to have a lot of questions to ask my people that I'm peer reviewing for, and I want examples. So don't be afraid to give examples, don't be afraid to clarify, but also make sure that your sentence structure is sound. Now, I really recommend, if you're struggling with this concept and you have the same issues that my lovely boyfriend has, that you check out our video on fragmented sentences. It would be fragmented sentences or sentence fragments. I say fragments of sentences, but technically the correct term is sentence fragments. Sorry, I flipped the concept. I say fragmented sentences. I'm the problem. But either way, those sentences do be fragmented, and sometimes you need a little kick in the pants to kind of figure out, okay, this is a fragment, this does need some clarification, or this needs to be merged with another sentence. So don't be afraid to check out that resource, or if you're really worried about it, send us an email, make an appointment. We're always happy to re-explain concepts in a new, fresh way and walk you through some examples. So don't be afraid to reach out to us just because we made a video on it. You can also ask us questions. We're not scared to talk about it. We're happy to do so. So yeah, that's all we've got for today. I do hope this kind of helped you understand some of the editing process, some of the things to look out for formatting-wise and writing-wise, as well as some examples of the editing process in action, and also what you might see if you ask me to edit your paper. If you ask me for peer review, that's what you're getting from me. Just a friendly reminder that if you're still finding yourself with questions, comments, concerns, you could always find us at the Writing Center. We're always there. We have no life. We are here to help you master all things to do with writing and revising your paper. So not just the writing process, but the revising as well, as you can see here. So stop by with a draft for us to look at, or with questions on how to tackle your writing needs. We are always happy to help. For more information on this topic and more, you could always feel free to check out our website for more information and ways to meet with a tutor to help you with all your writing needs. Whether it be online, in person, or by email, we are always happy to help you out. And with that said, we hope to see you soon. Bye!